So, Berto, what is gaslighting? What is the definition of gaslighting according to Humberto Castañeda?
It is basically where you're using deceptive tactics to try to convince someone of something that's factually not true, and yet by doing so, you do it so much, and you keep in character, so to speak, that the other person actually starts like second guessing their own reality.
Yeah, it's a good definition. So we get a lot of emails about this, a lot of questions, and a lot of people are using the word on the internet these days. So I asked people to submit their stories of gaslighting. We received a lot of submissions, and I thought we would read a sampling of those and find out how people are using the term. So in this episode, I want to define the term, and I also want to discuss related topics, related concepts that perhaps might be more apt when people are describing situations where they might use the word gaslighting. There might be a more accurate, precise word to describe what they're going through. Maybe gaslighting is also changing over time. I don't know. But the main thing that I want to do in today's episode is try to learn how people are using it and also validate people's experience. Because if you're ever using the term gaslighting, as in that person gaslit me, in all likelihood, that person harmed you. And it felt bad, and it was perhaps even immoral what was done to you. And so you deserve validation, regardless of what word one uses to describe it. Also, major trigger warning. We are going to be talking about gaslighting and anything related to it, so make sure that you take care of yourself and maybe not listen if you might be triggered. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a licensed therapist, and I'm also a professor. Who are you, Berto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I'm an unlicensed computer keyboard operator.
So the origin, as you mentioned, comes from a movie, but it actually goes back to a play, a British play called Gaslight, 1938. American Hollywood films adapted the play in 1940 and 1944. People talk about how movies today, how they're always doing, they can't come up with a new idea. Well, literally in 1940, there was a movie called Gaslight, and 4 years later, there was the same movie based on the same play called same name.
Same name.
So Hollywood's been doing this for a long time. And essentially in this play/movie, a man goes on a campaign to make a woman believe that she's losing her mind so he can get her jewels or something. He somehow finds out that she has a bunch of money in the house and he can't find it. And so he slowly tries to make her believe that she is losing her mind by moving the couch 10 inches or moving this and that. And when she walks in the room, she's like, why is the couch over there? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And just over and over and over again, spoiler alert, it doesn't work in the end, and the evil man is caught. Happy ending, everyone. And then in the 1970s, the term gaslighting started to show up in the psychoanalytic literature. And then in the last couple of years, it started showing up a lot online. For example, Berto, you and I did an episode on gaslighting 4 years ago. And I recently listened back to it, and I asked you at the beginning if you'd ever heard of the term gaslighting. Mm-hmm. And you were being honest by saying you had never heard of it before.
I think that's about right. It was about 4 years ago. I wonder what happened 4 years ago in our culture and our society where that started happening a lot and people started using the term.
Yeah.
Kind of hard to know.
Totally hard. Impossible, really. All right. So let's go into the definition here more descriptively. It's a verb, to gaslight. The main definition is to purposely manipulate someone by psychological means to make them question their own memory, perception, judgment, or sanity. So this is, as you described, Berto, earlier, and as in the movies and the play, this isn't trying to get someone to change their mind on one issue. This is trying to get someone, and it isn't trying to convince someone of something. This is trying to get someone to, in general, almost arbitrarily in some instances, to get through arbitrary means like moving a couch. You don't really care about moving the couch. You're trying to get someone to question their own sanity, judgment, memory, perception.
Right.
In general, not just about this one issue, but in general, you're trying to make someone believe that they don't have the ability to determine fact from fiction, right from wrong, real from unreal. It's purposeful, it's manipulative, and they use psychological means, meaning that, you don't beat someone over the head with a bat to convince them of something. You use these very Machiavellian, very premeditated in the classic sense of the definition. And now, the word might be evolving in recent years, so we can get into it. But in terms of how it had been used for so long, this is the definition. This is the definition that still is in the clinical literature. Another way to look at this is to gradually undermine the victim's confidence in their ability to distinguish fact from fiction, right from wrong, real from unreal, with the purpose of making the victim not only believe that they don't understand how to evaluate reality, but also to make them dependent and subservient to the gaslighter. So it's pretty specific, right? Because it's based on a very specific situation in the movie and play Gaslight. And up until 4 or 5 years ago, this is how it was typically used that I would see. A campaign, Machiavellian, premeditated, trying to make someone question their judgment in general to make the person dependent on and subservient to the gaslighter. Usually, it was used in the clinical literature in domestic violence, intimate partner violence literature, which we'll get into later. And by the way, trigger alert on that. Now, by the way, it can be successful or unsuccessful to gaslight. So if someone tries to gaslight, like in the play, in the movie, the dude, the evil guy, tried to gaslight the woman, but it didn't work. And you wouldn't say that he didn't actually gaslight. He just failed at gaslighting her. You know what I mean, bro?
Yeah, right. He was doing it. It's like, I guess it'd be attempted murder versus murder,
Right. Or
even, because for a while she was...
no. So let me, I don't know.
He committed gaslighting. He committed gaslighting.
Right. So say I tried to gaslight you, and right from the beginning, you know that I am trying to gaslight you.
You're still committing gaslighting.
I'm still gaslighting, right?
Yeah.
I've still committed the gaslight verb, if you will.
It's like you're not lying just because I didn't believe you.
Exactly.
I was thinking more of like if the goal was to ultimately drive the person insane, you happen to have failed at your goal, but it doesn't mean you didn't try.
Right, exactly. So now, as I said earlier, almost always gaslighting is in the context of an abusive relationship. A dominant partner is trying to gain control over their partner through various methods. They will isolate the victim. They will physically abuse the victim usually as well, or intimidate. They'll put them down with name calling. They'll make the victim dependent on the perpetrator, and they will also gaslight the victim. So gaslighting is usually a part of an array of tactics, if you will, that will keep a victim powerless and subservient underneath the abuser. So that's usually what we're talking about when we're talking about gaslighting, right? In the same way that if you talked about name calling, for example, well, there's just name calling, like someone on the street calls you a name, and then there's name calling within a domestic violence or intimate partner violence relationship, where the name calling is part of a system to gain control and to put someone down. Makes gaslighting sense. Is the same way, right? So, and now, this often results in, according to our observations of humans, when you abuse people and gaslight people, that the victims will feel like they're going crazy. They'll feel like, am I losing my mind? I feel like I knew once how to judge the world, and now, do I know? Am I going crazy? Did I forget that? Like I swear that's what happened, but the other person seems to really be convinced this other thing happened, and maybe I'm not good. And we'll get into that later when we talk about the descriptions from people that people submitted. Low self-esteem in general, just feeling like you aren't a smart, good person. Subservience, confusion, anxiety, and depression. So mental illness, mental disorders of anxiety will develop under these circumstances, depression, learned helplessness, even psychosis can develop. As your grasp on reality gets more and more taken away from you, you can even develop delusional symptoms. Okay, so in light of that definition, as we go forward, I developed the following checklist, Berto, and you tell me if this makes sense to you. So gaslighting needs to have the following 6 elements, generally speaking. 1, the gaslighter needs to be trying to get someone to question their judgment. 2, they're trying to get them to question their judgment in general, not just on one issue. They're being manipulative, meaning they're Machiavellian, they're premeditatively trying to get someone. And then number 4 is it's purposeful, meaning that it's not accidental or impulsive or something. And number 5, it's for personal gain. So it's not something that someone's doing for no reason, even if it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it feels to the victimizer as personal gain. And number 6 is that, and this is more of just kind of a guideline, is it's almost always in the presence of an abusive relationship in general. That's not really a criteria, but that's something to think about. Like usually when we're talking about gaslighting, we're talking about abusive relationship. Not always, and certainly the language is changing, and again, we'll get into that in a bit. Or is it the following 6 things, which we'll define, which is motivated reasoning, shame lying, mental illness, the Martha Mitchell effect, creeping normalcy, or Stockholm syndrome, which we'll define in a second. So when we read the stories from the submitters, we'll evaluate those 6 criteria, or is it one of these other 6 things?
I see what you're saying. Like if it fits the 6 criteria, you're saying that's gaslighting. But if it doesn't, it might be one of these other like related variants.
Right. Related concepts, more precise concepts. And it could also be both. You could have someone both be gaslighting and have Stockholm syndrome involved. But anyway, so Berto, tell me, is this gaslighting? I'm going to give a history example.
Did you say history?
Yeah. So I guess it is kind of history because it is psychology in Seattle history. In that 4 years ago, I did an episode called Sexism and Christine Collins. So there's a movie in 2008, Clint Eastwood directed a film called Changeling. It's a terrible name for a movie. I mean, when you think of a movie called Changeling, what do you think?
Yeah, it sounds good. It sounds like a movie I'd be into. It's like a horror movie, kind of sci-fi horror.
Right.
This creature has landed, and it's
like Alien or something.
Yeah, and it can change into different people, and the whole thing.
No, it is a historical drama. Angelina Jolie plays a woman in the 1920s. So let me tell you the story, and then remember this movie is called Changeling. Okay, so a real story about a woman named Christine Collins, played by Angelina Jolie. Her 9-year-old son went missing in 1928, and it made national headlines. And the police found a boy who claimed to be, like months later, who claimed to be her son. And it was this big deal because everyone thought the boy was dead. It was like, it's been months, he must be gone forever. It was a big deal. So they found a boy who claimed to be her son. And so they had this big media event. And the boy gets off the train, and Christine Collins is like desperate, like, oh my God, my son. She immediately sees him and says, and in her head, she says, that's not my son. And she goes to the police officer. She's like, that's not my son. But
and how much time had gone by?
Months.
Okay, so it's not like years where she wouldn't recognize her own son.
Right. But enough time. And
even then it'd be like,
But enough time where maybe, right? But, it'd be hard,
Hard pressed.
And incidentally, the boy was like years older than,
oh my gosh,
than the other boy, than the real boy. Anyway, so the press is there, and it's this big moment. Yeah, it's this big moment. And the police, long story short, essentially pressure her. There's like, just take him home. You're probably just hysterical. It's probably him. Don't don't make a scene. And she's like, okay.
It's
so she
probably him. Oh my God.
Yeah. So they bring him, because the police don't care, at
Oh
least in
my
this
God.
instance, they don't care about the actual case. They just want this woman to shut up, and they want a success. They want to be in the press as succeeding.
How's that gonna work?
So she goes home because,
Oh my
if you
God.
think sexism is bad today, think about 1928. So they send her home, and she comes immediately back. She's like, okay, now that the cameras are away, it's not my son. I have a boy living in my house who's claiming to be my son. It's not him. I know it's not him. And they're like, are you sure? I mean, it's kind of been a long time. She's like, no, it's not my son. And they're, well, I don't know. I mean, maybe you're hysterical.
What is the son saying? Is the son saying like, I'm your son?
Yeah. Because
oh my God.
he is on some kind of weird,
Okay.
He eventually reported he was trying to meet a movie star. Because I think
this
she
a
might
real
have lived
story
in
you
Los
said?
Angeles. Yeah.
Oh my God.
He was trying to meet a movie star, and he wanted to go west to meet his famous movie star in California, and so he just said that to get free passage or something. But anyway, so he's this little psychopath in some ways, and she's freaked out by it. She goes to the police, and this goes on for a long time. I don't know how long, but it goes on for a long time. And eventually, get this, Brito, they commit her to a psychiatric ward, saying that she has lost her mind.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's so infuriating. No, this can't be a real story. This is like a good plot for Hollywood.
So why in the world do you think they called it Changeling? Why would Clint Eastwood call this movie Changeling?
I mean, because the
Maybe the
kid
boy
changed the boy changed into a different boy.
The boy almost has nothing to do with it.
Nothing to do with it.
It's mainly Angelina Jolie and her fight against sexism in the society.
Oh my gosh.
But anyway, I did a whole episode on this 4 years ago to talk about sexism. Is this gaslighting, Berto?
Yeah, I mean, so, okay. It's not one person, although the boy, you could argue the boy absolutely is gaslighting. But, okay, based on your definition, I suppose that the intent probably wasn't to drive this person mad. There was ill intent. So let's go through the criteria again.
Trying to get someone to question their judgment, and then two, in general.
Yeah, okay, that one's a little iffy. I think it's in the boy's best interest to get her to question her judgment, maybe in general, because then she'll maybe acquiesce to this crazy notion. Two,
is it manipulative?
yes, absolutely, by both the cops and the kid.
Yeah, because they both basically knew. The cops were pretty immediately thinking, maybe we made a mistake. Is it purposeful? Was it on purpose?
It is on purpose to lie to her. What's not on purpose, again, is I don't think they were like, okay, let's turn this lady into an insane person.
But it's purposeful in that they know they're lying.
Yes.
Is it for personal gain?
Yes, for the boy it is, and for the cops it is, because they wanted the case closed.
Yeah. And then 6, it's not necessarily a part of an abusive relationship unless you count sexism, which you could. Is it motivated well, we'll get into that later. But okay, so now, is this a classic gaslighting scenario? No, because it doesn't involve an abusive relationship. But you could make a case that they were trying, the boy and the power structure were trying to get her to question her judgment, to accept the boy as her son, and move on with her life so other people win. The cops win, the boy wins, and she kind of wins maybe in their mind because she gets her quote-unquote boy back, right?
Well, and if you had called the movie Gas Boy, I'd be totally fine with it.
Yeah, they should have called it Gas Boy. Okay, so let's talk about different sorts of other concepts that are related to gaslighting. First off, let's talk about some synonyms. So mind games or head games are synonyms for gaslighting. Maybe on a smaller scale, people might use those. That person's playing mind games with me. Or maybe gaslighting is a form of a mind game or something. There's also crazy making, which is a synonym for gaslighting. Sometimes you can interchange crazy making with gaslighting, but it's also used in situations that make you like when you like situations that make you second guess your judgment. Like, have you ever been like you sign up for a website or something like I don't know, like some kind of web service, and you try to cancel the subscription, like Netflix or something. You try to cancel it, and you cannot find the button for how to cancel. Has that ever happened to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That feels crazy making, because you keep thinking it's got to be somewhere. What's wrong with me? The way they they do it masterfully. The way they lay it out, they make you think it's your fault for not finding the button. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then if you email them, they're like, it's on the website. And then you're thinking, what's wrong with me? And so it's crazy making, because you start to question whether or not you're smart enough to even do it. So that the situation is set up to essentially make you feel like you're quote unquote crazy. Another concept is memory manipulation, which is perhaps a subcategory of gaslighting, where you're trying to change someone's memory, but it's also broader than gaslighting in that well-meaning therapists in the past and in the current will insert memories into their clients' minds. You've heard of this, right, Berto?
I've heard about this idea. I haven't heard of cases where it worked or something like that, but certainly the idea
or interrogation, like with Making a Murderer. You remember with the brother?
Sure. Yeah, incepting. And we even talked about this in the case of the cases where the kids were asked if they had been touched inappropriately in a daycare in California, and then slowly but surely they were told, "Well, are you sure you didn't?" And then eventually, like, "Yeah, I guess I did." And
exactly. Well-meaning therapists perhaps will manipulate memory in clients, and that's, you could say, is related to gaslighting, kind of, but not really, right? It's different. Okay, so now let's talk about concepts that aren't really related to gaslighting, but can be confused for it. So creeping normality. What do you think that means, Berto? Creeping normality.
That's the Overton window or something like that. Basically, if you get boiled alive like a frog, right? If you shift what's normal a little bit, and then people are like, well, that's weird, but then enough time goes by, you're like, well, I guess that's life. And then you shift it again. Like, well, that's not okay, but I guess we're going to have to deal with it. If you did it all at once, went from 0 to 60, everyone would rebel, the world would collapse. But you do it a little bit at a time, and then you look back, and all of a sudden you're like, what the hell are we doing? Right. And no one can tell how we got to where we were.
Right. This is also called gradualism or landscape amnesia. What's an example of this in our lives today?
Well, this is, I wrote a song. One of the songs I wrote for that concert where I opened for you a couple of years ago was called Grenouille, which means frog in French, I think. And it was about us getting boiled like frogs. And it's about global warming in my case, in that sense. It's that little bit by little bit, we're like, oh yeah, that's weird. We had another smoky season this year. Well, oh man, that's weird. And then the next year it's like, yeah, oh, there's no more snow in Mount Rainier. Oh, that's weird. Oh, they just, like I just saw a thing. All the kelp died in the Costa Rica. Oh, that's weird. And slowly but surely, our world collapses before our eyes, but we're like, little bit by little bit, getting okay with it.
Right. Also, loss of privacy. I remember when the internet first started to ask you questions about yourself, like, could you give us your credit card? The vast majority of people said, never, ever put your credit card on the internet. Right. And now people just, including myself, just throw it around, Venmo and all sorts of things.
Do you want me to remember your credit? Yes, absolutely. Remember. I don't want to ever type my number again.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Some of us, we just don't even want to we don't even remember. It's like, yes, computer and the internet, please remember it for me.
Instant buy. One click.
But that's even, that's just credit card. I mean, talk about cookies and monitoring and your home listening device, that you literally have a listening device in your house that is issued by a major corporation that's trying to market to you. And we just do it willingly. It's fine, Yeah. Now, is it bad or good? I don't know, but I do know that if you would have asked people 20 years ago to have one of those, pucks or whatever, no one would have bought them. They would have thought
Right.
that's absurd. There's just no possible way that anyone would ever buy. But again, little by little over 20 years, we lose a little privacy here. We hand over our privacy here. We do a little bit more here. And before long, you're just like, yeah, what's the big deal? Is it good or bad? I don't know. But that's what we call creeping normalcy. Another is mass shootings in the United States.
Yeah.
They become normal. And we all understand that so normal that we don't even report them. They're happening. They're still happening, by the way.
Yeah.
They're happening almost every day, or so, I don't know this frequency, but
No, there was just a
yeah,
terrible spree against the Asian community.
right. And that one got into the news because of, I don't even know, I guess because there's Asians or they're the number or something, I don't know, but mass shootings are happening all the time. And 10 years ago, any one of those would have been strange enough that it would have been, top news for a month. But now it's like, it's normal now. It's just a part of our lives. Okay. So that's creeping normalcy. What you could see how that's similar to gaslighting. So brainwashing, what's brainwashing definition, Berto?
I mean, that one is similar to what, you would do or it's kind of like what you would do in a cult, where you would bring people in and then essentially convince them of a total different reality about the world and their relationships and what they should prioritize and so forth. But usually you're not trying to drive them insane. You're actually trying to get them on your side and give you money, or just stay in your system, or live in your commune, or maybe go commit suicide en masse, or go kill a whole bunch of people, whatever. But the goal isn't necessarily insanity normally. Normally it's like, it is control, and you are deceiving. You're doing all those things, but with a different name.
Yeah. It's very similar to gaslighting.
Yeah.
And you could use them interchangeably in some situations. For example, with cults, you mentioned you could use this brainwashing term in a lot of cults, saying that, just slowly isolating someone and saying, this is the Son of God. He does deserve to take your wife. He does deserve to take your money, just slowly, again, creeping normalcy in there a little bit too, as a way of getting control and dominance. But it doesn't have that element of trying to make the person question their judgment in general. But you might use gaslighting to brainwash someone, but you don't have to use gaslighting to brainwash someone. The Manchurian Candidate, the movie, also Patty Hearst is an example sometimes that people use for having been brainwashed. If you're not familiar with that story, I think there's a movie coming out about her. There's been other movies, but 1974, member of a wealthy Hearst family, and she was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, a left-wing militant organization, basically a terrorist, you could say, organization in the United States. I guess if you're sympathetic, you would just say left-wing organization. After a while, she was kidnapped, and they were going to use her for ransom. And after a while, she joined the group, and she believed in their cause, and she didn't try to escape, and she even participated in the crimes like robbing a bank. And she was arrested and charged, and she said, I'm a part of this army. I'm a part of this group. When they, confronted her, she didn't say, I was only doing it because people were, they threatened to kill me. I mean, all she'd had to say is say that, and she would have been scot-free, but she refused because she believed in the cause at this point. And again, rewind the clock, she's just a regular girl, rich girl, and she gets kidnapped and held at knife point and gunpoint for many weeks, and eventually she starts to believe it. So the defense was that she was brainwashed. The defense did not work. She was sentenced to 35 years.
Wow.
Until President Carter commuted her sentence to the 22 months served. Is this brainwashing, Berto? I mean, we don't know the details, obviously, but could it be brainwashing?
I mean, so it sounds like it. I would think it's like, Stockholm Syndrome a bit, like gaining sympathy for her kidnappers. But who knows the details, like you said. Because, you could imagine cases where, I grew up in Colombia, and there were the rebels. The rebels were originally fighting because there was a lot of injustice and a lot of wealth inequality. So imagine you are from a wealthy family, you get kidnapped, and while you're living in this commune, you get to see all the misery that people live in and kind of those disparities. And then you start being like, well, yeah, what the heck is going on? And then you turn to that side. Is that brainwashing? Yeah, who knows? Like maybe they did apply really strong brainwashing tactics, all these things. So I could see it being a totally gray area. But it does, like, I wouldn't say that it's always a open and shut case. If you get kidnapped and then later you're for the thing that kidnapped you, it's always brainwashing. That could be like saying that anytime you end up being convinced about a cause in any way, it's because of brainwashing. And that's too broad of a definition for my taste.
Yeah, it's hard to know. We don't know the ins and outs of the interactions, but in Stockholm Syndrome you bring up, which actually let's just move on to that. That's another topic similar to gaslighting. So what's the definition of Stockholm Syndrome, Berto?
Yeah, I believe, I can't remember. I knew before why it was called Stockholm. I'm sure you'll tell me. But it's, you get abducted or kidnapped, and you end up developing sympathy for your kidnappers, for the people that have you held. And that results in you actually maybe wanting to stay with them or wanting to not be rescued, or maybe joining their cause.
Yeah, exactly. I read recently why it's called Stockholm, but I believe that it's because there was I think a bank robbery or something in Stockholm, and the hostages eventually wanted to stick up for the bank robbers and hostage takers, and actually wouldn't testify against them even after they were freed, that kind of thing.
Oh.
Yeah. So what percentage, according to the FBI, of hostage victims show evidence of Stockholm Syndrome, Berto?
Ooh, interesting. 30%.
5.
Oh, okay.
Why'd you say 30?
I was thinking maybe it's just a common human response.
Well, 5% is pretty common, and
yeah,
I think this includes short-term and long-term hostages. You know what I mean? If you're a hostage for 5 hours, it's probably not going to develop Stockholm Syndrome. So do you remember Lee Boyd Malvo and John Muhammad, the DC killers?
Yes, the snipers. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's 2002, and John Muhammad was the older fella, and Lee Boyd Malvo was he was 16 at the time. And they killed a bunch of people. 17, I couldn't find how many. It was just a lot.
Brutal.
And they would do those sniper attacks from inside the car. They would sit in the back, and it was a very effective way of getting away with it, because they would just wait on the sidewalk and wait for someone to, the person they were trying to kill, and they would shoot them, and then they just drive away, and anyone seeing it wouldn't see anyone with a gun. You know what I mean? Because they had a way of shooting the person actually through a hole in the back of the car. I think they broke a hole in the brake light or something and shot through that. Anyway, so when it came to light who was doing this, they're like, okay, you got this 40, I don't know, John Muhammad guy, and you have this teenage boy, but they both participated in the killings. And again, they used the brainwashing defense, as they did with Patty Hearst. You could also say Stockholm Syndrome. Do you think it worked, Berto?
So are you saying was the boy originally kidnapped by him?
No. I don't know how I think they knew each other through family, or I don't know. But what do you just based on the little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like that there's probably some manipulation. I would imagine that the older one groomed him, which, if you will, to join him and participate, which it's definitely manipulative. It might be, I would call it potentially brainwashing, considering how dramatic the outcome was and how life-ruining.
Right. The question is, would Lee Boyd Malvo, the teenager, done anything like this?
Oh, yeah.
On his own, right?
Probably not.
Probably not, right? And at what point? So if you had a 10-year-old, I don't think anyone would fault the 10-year-old, right? You just be, well, he's influenced. Yeah. 16. What are we saying? That's old enough to da? But the jury did not have it, and he's currently serving multiple life sentences. John Muhammad was executed 2009. Okay. So we've talked about gaslighting, talked about mind games, which is similar or exactly the same as gaslighting. We've talked about crazy making, memory manipulation, creeping normality, brainwashing, Stockholm syndrome. Now let's talk about things that really aren't related to gaslighting. So I'm going to tell you a word, Berto, and you tell me the definition of it. Deception. What is deception?
That is lying.
Yeah, right. It's attempting to mislead. You're trying to hide the truth, or you're trying to promote an idea that isn't true, and it's often for personal gain. So this is bad behavior, right?
Yeah.
Lying is bad, right?
Lying is bad.
Deceiving is bad.
Except in some
right?
cases.
Except in some rare cases. But deception, lying is bad and harmful and really hurtful. And so I say that because later on we might be saying, is this gaslighting or just, not just, is this gaslighting or deception? I think that part of my hypothesis is that people feel like if they tweet, I'm being deceived, that won't get people to pay any attention. They're like, so what? You're being lied to. Who cares? You say you're being gaslit. Now people are going to listen more for whatever reason because the word is newer or feels more weighty or something to it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the majority of it, right? There's a new term on the scene, and all of a sudden everyone was dabbing, you know? And so people are now being gaslit left and right. And
yeah, and language changes over time, and maybe like the word literally, for example.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, literally meant...
It literally meant what it meant.
Yeah. It meant that it was the opposite of figuratively.
Yes.
It was a synonym for actually, right?
Yeah.
It's like, he actually spit in my face, or,
Yeah.
you know, he literally spit in... I'm not saying...
So that's a great example, because if you said actually today, actually still means actually.
Right.
So if you're like, I was over at Berto's, and he actually grabbed his guitar and smacked my finger with it. And someone would be like, that's horrible. And you're like, well, no, I don't mean for real. Wait, what?
You said actually.
Right. But if you said literally, like, you know, I think it leaves some room for interpretation nowadays.
Right. He literally he literally spit in my face. People, it's unclear how they're using it. Now, at first I was like, stop saying that, but every word evolves over time, and I'm an oldie now, and I just have to, in the same way that when I go to McDonald's or, you know, McDonald's or a place where like I would expect to see certain prices, I'm always surprised, because to me, I grew up where lunch at any fast food restaurant, Subway, McDonald's, you know, a pizza place, was definitely under $5. Like in my head,
right.
$5, if $6 is like way too much for lunch at any restaurant, you know? I mean, I remember when I was, you know, working with my bachelor's degree, I remember going to Taco Bell and getting 3 tacos for $1. I would get 6 tacos for $2, and it was including tax. So you just gave them $2, and they gave you, you know, a bag of 6 tacos. And I was so poor, you know, that's all I could eat, right? I was just like, I guess I'm eating these 6 terrible tacos. But anyway, so the word gaslighting, I think, is changing, and I just have to live with that.
Well, sorry, I will add that in reality, I'd venture to say most people never even knew what the original meaning was.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't really, like, sure, we did that episode, but in general, I don't know, 1 year, it sounds like 4 years ago or whatever, I started hearing the term. And then I just kind of went along with it, and I've probably used it here and there, and I wouldn't think twice if someone used it, because it was just a new word that got introduced.
Yeah. But when you've been using it for so long, and in the context of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, it feels like it's a thing to me. You know, it's like
narcissism. Right.
Or when people use the word codependency willy-nilly or something, I'm like, wait, how are you using the word? And at first I want to say, no, that's wrong. You're using it wrong. But then eventually the dam breaks, and I'm like, okay, I have to accept that it's being used differently now. You know, that's a weird space, because if someone just comes along and for the first person that used literally in the quote unquote wrong way. Should we just give into that first person without knowing that the tide is coming? But anyway, Berto, motivated reasoning, what's the definition of that?
Motivated reasoning is like where I have a conclusion I want to reach because I have a vested interest in it. So, I want to sell cigarettes. So therefore, I am going to, present the case for why cigarettes are fine. In fact, they're healthy. They're better for you.
Do you know they're unhealthy when you're saying that?
Absolutely.
That's actually not motivated reasoning, actually.
Oh, okay.
Motivated reasoning is when you actually believe it. It's motivated. Your reasoning is motivated by emotions or bias. So
okay.
So let's say an example would be you sell cigarettes. You're a cigarette salesman.
Sure.
And you get data going both ways, that it's bad for you, it's good for you. And you cram that all into your head, and then someone comes up to you, some customer, and says, well, aren't cigarettes bad for you? And you'll say, no, lots of studies show. And you believe. You hook yourself up to a lie detector. You're not lying. So you believe that cigarettes are good for you.
Right. The executives had the actual data. But the salesperson in this case, I don't know. I'm looking at this data, not that data, because I want to.
Right. Or another person, say a smoker, someone who actually is smoking.
Right.
And you come up to them and say, why are you smoking? It's bad for you. They'll be like, actually, it's not that bad for you. It's fine. Or if I quit, if I only smoke 5 cigarettes a day, it's fine. We understand that's emotional perceiving, it's distorted thinking, it's motivated reasoning. Your reasoning is being motivated by emotion, that is, because to the person smoking cigarettes, for them to agree that it's unhealthy, they have to face their addiction, which they don't want to do. And so it's a bias that affects their reason case. So motivated reasoning is a very powerful effect that could be perceived as gaslighting under some circumstances, which we'll get into later. Okay, shame lying. This is my term, Berto. What do you think it means? I think it's kind of self-evident.
Shame lying. I am ashamed of something, and so therefore I'm going to lie about it.
Right.
As an example, did you run off the cross-country course into the bushes because you had to go to the bathroom in an emergency? No, of course I didn't. That would be crazy.
Right. Or a child will lie to get out of trouble, right? You come around the corner and you see that a light is crashed on the ground, and you knew that your daughters were running around breaking, they were being rambunctious. You come around the corner and there's a vase that's broken on the ground. And you're like, okay, who broke the vase? And they're like, we didn't do it. And you're like, well, how did this happen? They're like, I don't know. And you're like, were you being rambunctious? I thought I heard you being rambunctious. We weren't being rambunctious. We were just sitting here. Okay. They know that they bumped it and knocked it over and broke it. Are they gaslighting, Berto? Are they gaslighting?
Yes, that's abusive.
Yeah. Well, answer. Tell me.
Well, no, it's not. It's not a gaslight.
Right, but this is important because the shame lying concept is extremely deceptive to the victim, because under certain circumstances it can feel like gaslighting, but it's more precisely defined as shame lying. It's still wrong. It's still bad. You catch someone who has cheated on you, and they shame lie, and they say, I didn't cheat on you. That you didn't, you read it wrong. Or that was just a sarcastic text between me and we were just joking around. You know that they're lying to you. Is that gaslighting or not? Well,
I mean, again, this is, I think, where the reality, the rubber hits the road. When people are just talking, that's fine. Like, you two better stop gaslighting me. Fine. But is it technically based on the criteria you laid out? No.
Just rattling off some other things that aren't gaslighting. We have mental illness. So some conditions cause people to have distortions or breaks from reality. And those individuals are not technically gaslighting someone when they are lying, because they're distorted or they're broke from reality. And so that's not gaslighting. That's just, it might feel like gaslighting, but it's not technically gaslighting. Okay. Another term here is the Martha Mitchell effect. Do you know what that is, Berto?
I don't think so, no.
So the origin of this word comes from psychologist Brendan Maher, named the effect after Martha Mitchell. So Martha Mitchell was the wife of John Mitchell, U.S. Attorney General in the Nixon administration. Do you remember John Mitchell? He was one of the major people being, testifying. So
I learned about him
wife,
from Rachel Maddow.
Yeah. So the wife, Martha Mitchell, she alleged, earlier, prior to all this coming out, that White House officials were engaged in illegal activities. She was saying, hey, by the way, Nixon and all of them, because I hear about this through my husband, illegal activities. She was assessed by mental health people and diagnosed as being delusional because they were like, she's saying all these crazy things. She's saying that there's illegal activities and that the White House is monitoring her phone and, all these things that sounded outlandish. And so they diagnosed her as being delusional and tried to put her on, treatment, this sort of thing. Later, she was vindicated. So, similar to the Christine Collins story, you have this, but different in that it's accidental. She comes in, someone comes into your office as a therapist and says, the government is after me, the president is doing all these evil things. They're monitoring my phone. One of the first thoughts you're going to have as a therapist is this person delusional? You don't usually think, maybe it's true. That's not usually what crosses you. When they say the classic persecutory delusional statements, you usually think, oh, this is a mental illness. So this is an accidental effect where people, and again, you throw sexism in there, where you're not going to listen to a woman's opinion. And it creates this situation where everyone is convinced. They're not gaslighting. They just, oh, she's crazy, essentially. Instead of, maybe we should be listening to her. And essentially, if they had listened to her earlier, then, Nixon might have been brought to justice earlier.
That's crazy. That is crazy.
Yeah, that's called the Martha Mitchell effect. We also have persuasive speech, which is not gaslighting. It's just trying to convince someone of something and not trying to question their own judgment. But then again, you might do that, right? You might say, hey, you and me, Berto, we might be fighting about whether a movie is good or not. Well, a classic tactic that you and I will use against each other is, your judgment is wrong. You don't understand. You're not looking at it right. You don't understand how to evaluate movies. You didn't watch it correctly. I'm trying to, you and I are trying to get the other person to question their own judgment, right? Is that gaslighting, Berto?
Well, I mean, it's also like this very funny technique of, I used to do this. It's terrible. But you'd be like, that's because you haven't seen as many movies as I have. Or like some sort of like, right. You didn't take music theory. Oh, it's like a really conceited. But that's not gaslighting. That's just trying to be a jerk.
Right. But it is akin to gaslighting, but we wouldn't call it gaslighting because I'm not going on a mission to undermine your your belief in your own judgment in general. But we might be trying to get someone to question their judgment on this particular topic because we're trying to be we're trying to be persuasive. That's part of being persuasive, is pointing out points that might convince the other person, including maybe you don't know what you're talking about, which of course isn't nice persuasive speech, but it's a common persuasive speech. And then, of course, propaganda, which has to do with usually used in the governments will send out propaganda to convince you that the USSR is doing fine. But I will actually not use the word wrong sometimes. Like I'll say that I, as a male, have absorbed the propaganda that men cannot have feelings. That's not technically propaganda, but I kind of like the word propaganda because it I think accentuates the image I'm trying to say, which is this almost like a malicious, organized intent to make people believe a certain idea that is false. But it, of course, is not propaganda. It's just cultural. It's a cultural notion that gets passed down through various different means. Might the government do it? Kind of participate in it, absolutely. But it's not strictly propaganda. But I like to stretch the word a little bit because it feels poetic to me in the way that saying, that person literally spat in my face feels a little bit more emphasizing. Okay, so let's go to the break. And when we get back from the break, let's actually go over people's submissions and talk about how people are using the word gaslighting. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
So, Berto, if you're trying to gaslight people into becoming patrons of the podcast, what would that sound like?
Hey, I got your message last night. Oh, no, you sent me a message. Oh, you must have done it. Or maybe it was a pocket message, but I saw that you were trying to reach me. Anyways, I figured that you were trying to re-up your patron subscription. What do you mean you didn't have it? Well, of course you've had it. You've been our patron for years. Wait, are you seriously not remembering? Is this maybe because of that thing we talked about? Well, you told me the other day about what your therapist said. Oh my gosh, you don't even remember that conversation? Oh, I'm so sorry. Listen, I think the best and only course of action for you now is to re-up your subscription, probably go up in a level. Before? Oh yeah, I think you were at the highest tier. Maybe we'll open up a new tier just for you. Okay, that sounds good.
My God, you're eerily good at that. Okay, so a lot of people submitted their stories. I went on our Facebook page and asked, hey, submit your stories of gaslighting and we'll read them on the podcast. And we can't read all of them because there were a lot of submissions. And also, trigger warning, because we're going to be talking about severe abuse. So if you're triggered by that, take care of yourself. Don't listen or do it in breaks. So Anonymous from Hawaii said the following things. My ex-partner gaslit me constantly. Many times I expressed serious concern about the toxicity of our relationship and how hurt I was by my partner's mistreatment. He would say that I was too young to understand relationships, and when I became his age, I'd realize how wrong I was all the time. This became a frequent comment from him. He told me I was too sensitive and that I needed to build a stronger backbone if I wanted to make it in the real world. He would call me names. He would constantly tell me I was at fault for anything wrong with our relationship. He threatened to hurt himself if I left. He told me I would never find a boyfriend better than him and would regret it if I ever left him. He would punch walls, slam doors, and physically block me from leaving the house when things escalated. I was constantly reassured that this was how relationships worked by him. I hated myself. I eventually hated myself to an extreme level. By the last year of our relationship, I felt completely worthless and broken. I believed everything he said to and about me. Berto, does this sound like gaslighting to you?
It does. It does. I mean, the person was purposely trying to get this other person to essentially question everything they would have known or could have learned about relationships and about their specific relationship. They seem to use a lot of manipulative language and it clearly involved an abusive relationship from the narrative. Obviously, I'm just taking the narrative at face value. And I think that the person feared that if they didn't get this person, the abuser feared probably that if they didn't get this person to fully let go of their reason and just give in, and that they would lose them, and then they were obviously afraid so much that they would threaten to hurt themselves, which I think was manipulative as well. And to me, it sounds like it.
Right. Exactly. Well said. So first off, Anonymous from Hawaii, I'm sorry you went through that. That's just terrible, terrible victimization. I'm glad you got out of it. There's a lot of therapy to recover from that. You deserve that. I hope you get a lot of support. And I'm just so sorry you went through that. So let's go over the 6 elements here. Trying to get someone to question their judgment, and 2, trying to get them to question their judgment in general. Berto didn't have that.
Yeah, there are 2 things that stuck out to me. One of them was the threat of self-harm. That one is like, well, you'd be, the implication, you'd be responsible for me hurting myself. And then the second one, which was the more blanket one, was like, hey, this is how relationships are.
Right.
That one is really dangerous. That's like, hey, because it's a blanket statement. It's like basically a free pass. Anything I do or say now, I'm just going to let you know that's how relationships are. So you can't question any of it.
Right.
Questioning any of it is you questioning human relationships in general.
Right. Also, he would say that she was too young to understand relationships, and that when she became his age, that she would realize how wrong that she was, right? So that's pretty clear, right? It's like, you don't understand. You're too young. When you're older, you'll understand. You're young and you don't have good judgment. And you repeat this for years, and you are unrelenting. The example that I give when I talk about gaslighting with my trainees is when you're in a fight with your partner, and you're both going back and forth, you're saying, but you said this, and the other person says, I didn't say that, and but you're wrong because this, and the other person says, I'm not wrong, you're wrong. You kind of go back and forth, right? Well, imagine if the person you're arguing with never once allows you to have a point. They never believe that they're to blame. They never relent. They are 110% sure that they are always right and you are always wrong. You might, even if you're pretty sure you're right, you're never 110% right. You never are 110% confident you're right. You're never 110% confident the other person is wrong. You're usually like, well, I'm 90% sure I'm right, and I'm 90% sure my partner is wrong, but I don't have a personality disorder and such. I allow for a little bit of possibility there. Who knows? But if you're interfacing with someone that is so confident and they never give in, then you might start questioning yourself, because you're thinking, well, he has 0%. He says there's 0% chance that he's wrong. I think there's a 10% chance that I'm wrong. So maybe I'm wrong. When you interface with someone that's, it's like when you're doing trivia games and you're on a trivia team. Have you ever done that before, Berto? Like a trivia team?
Yeah, in fact, we've done trivia.
Right. So when a question comes up and you think you know the answer, right? It's like a Family Feud thing, right? You think, right, I'm pretty sure the answer is 5, but Joe is 100% sure that it's 6.
You're not going to gamble on your 5%.
Yeah, you're not going to gamble on that you're 80% sure it's 5. Joe is 100% sure it's 6. We're going to go with Joe. So the same goes in relationships. When you're isolated and no one else is around because they can't gauge what's really happening, we have this bias that breaks us down over time. And so that's what gaslighters will use against you, is never give in, never apologize, constantly give the message, you don't know what you're talking about, you're too young, you're too this, you're too emotional, you're weak. Remember that time when you were wrong? Well, this is one of those times. And you don't have any comeback to that because they've never admitted they were wrong. They've never said there's a possibility that they're wrong. They seem so confident, and eventually you just become brainwashed or gaslit, which is, the condition. So going through our list here, it's manipulative, it's purposeful, it's for personal gain, as you said, to retain the relationship, and it's always in the midst of an abusive relationship. The anonymous in Hawaii pointed out that he would punch walls, slam doors, physically block her from leaving the house when things escalated. So we're looking at, a pattern of abuse that gaslighting was a part of. There was a pattern of abuse, and a subset of that abuse manifested in the form of gaslighting. Okay, so now let's read another example. Oksana, she says, I'm being gaslit by my father. I'm having a pest problem in my apartment at the moment. I called my father a few days ago asking for help. I knew what his reaction would be, but I was hoping to get support for my pest problem in my apartment. Well, as usual, when I get emotional, he starts to question my sanity. He denied that I had a problem, even though I told him I have evidence that there is a problem. And he said I'm exaggerating. Berto, is this gaslighting?
No. I mean, it doesn't fit the criteria you laid out. I wouldn't even use it in the common parlance term myself. I would just be like, I don't know, that seems a little more straightforward in my opinion, but you know.
So what is it? Is it, well, first off, Oksana, I'm sorry you went through that. Your father, in your description, sounds like he's mistreating you. He is, you have a pest problem. You know you have a pest problem. You're calling him for support, and why not support you? What would be the harm in that? Why would he believe that you don't know how to evaluate those things? It's just unfair behavior. It's awful. So of the 6, motivated reasoning, shame, lying, mental illness, Martha Mitchell effect, creeping normalcy, Stockholm syndrome, what do you think it is?
Neither. As an example, when I was a teenager, I was 15, my vision was getting bad. And I was embarrassed about it and stuff like that. The teacher asked me how come I walked up to the spelling words every day to write them down in my notebook. Why couldn't I just stay seated? I shamed lied. I said, I want to make sure I got them right or whatever. Okay. But then when I told my mom that I needed to go see an ophthalmologist, she said, no, you don't. I said, no, I think I do. She said, no, your eyes are fine. Is that gaslighting? No. Was it lame? Absolutely. Eventually, she finally relented, and we did go, and guess what? I needed glasses. It was lame, but it wasn't gaslighting. It was also not Stockholm syndrome. It wasn't shame lying. Well, for her, I guess maybe there could be some shame about, like, my son can't have eye problems. Maybe. But it's not the same thing. It's not like, I better lie to him. It's more like she was in denial, So I don't know. I don't have a good term for it. I think what the dad is doing is definitely crappy. Why would you question your daughter like this? Why would my mom not believe that I needed? Why would I be making up that I need to go to the, right? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But it's not gaslighting.
So first off, I don't think we want to use the word lame anymore. That's ableist. I get it.
Oh, it is?
Yeah. I mean,
because
yeah,
is lame someone that...
The idea you're saying is your mom was she was mistreating you. She was letting you down. She was disappointing you, but you're using a term of, that's synonymous with having a hard time walking, essentially.
That's funny because it's maybe because I didn't grow up here, because I've only ever known the word lame as the common parlance. That's not cool, man.
Right. So for this person saying, I'm being gaslit by my father, I said I had a pest problem. He said I was exaggerating. The term I would use for this is motivated reasoning, because I don't know, because we don't know what his reasoning was, but that would be the first hypothesis I would pursue if I was trying to determine what I would call this, because I would suspect that he has difficulty with emotion maybe, or he has difficulty with people asking him for help, or he has an addiction maybe, and he has shame about that, and he has a hard time being responsible for other people's issues. So I think that that would be the hypothesis I would go down is, if someone told me, so I went to my dad, I told him I had a pest problem, and he refused to listen to me. He was totally convinced that I was crazy and I didn't know what I was talking about. I would imagine that's coming from a place of what I would call motivated reasoning. Now, if you, Oksana, want to call that gaslighting, then everyone is entitled to call it that, but I'll just tell you what I would call it would be probably not gaslighting. Because now, if in general, and you kind of hinted at it, Oksana, you said that as usual, as usual, when I get emotional, he starts to question my sanity. So if that was part of a larger campaign, which it kind of sounds like maybe it was, then you could make an argument that that larger campaign is a gaslighting effort. for some reason, maybe to control you or keep you down or something like that. I don't know. All right. So Subdi from India, she says, I was in an abusive relationship. He cheated and continuously lied to me and made me question my reality. He blamed me for provoking him to abuse me. He manipulated my friends to pit them against me. He denied things he said. After a year of therapy, I still suffer from self-doubt. Berto, does this sound like gaslighting?
Well, that sounds more in the realm. The friends part, that's another one of those very controlling. Because if you are gaslighting someone, I would imagine, at least the times I've successfully gaslit people, I always needed to isolate them. Because if you have them talking to too many other people, almost to anyone else, but certainly to too many, and people they trust, they're going to start, putting too much evidence against my gaslight efforts. So I don't want that. So I'm going to want to say, hey, no, don't listen to your friends. Your friends. In fact, I'm probably going to make up stories about the friends.
Yeah.
And lie and be like, oh, you don't even want to know what they told me about you.
Right.
So it sounds like it.
Or at least spin things in that direction.
Things.
You always said that she was always against you, and I saw it. She's bad news for you. That kind of stuff. Yeah, this sounds very much like gaslighting. So again, she says, he cheated and continuously lied to me and made me question my reality. He blamed me for provoking him to abuse her. So imagine you're being abused, you're being hit and mistreated, and then there's always this message of, it's your fault. You're the one to blame for me abusing you. Manipulated her friends to pit them against her. He denied things he said. So I'm reading between the lines a little bit too. There's probably a lot more in terms of a similar story of what Anonymous from Hawaii talked about, of this just never admitting you're wrong, always blaming the other person. Through psychological means, you are breaking someone down. And the fact that she's saying after a year of therapy, I still suffer from self-doubt, irrational self-doubt.
Yeah.
That's what happens to you when you're being gaslit. You will emerge on the other side and during, where you literally will doubt yourself. You'll doubt your judgment. You'll doubt everything about you. And you didn't necessarily, you didn't actually doubt yourself that much before. That's what gaslighting will do to you. If someone is lying to you or mistreating you, and you see right through it, and at the end of the process you don't have any self-doubt, then it might lend itself to another word like deception or shame lying or motivated reasoning or just being in denial or something. So we hear this description of like ongoing gaslighting, ongoing blaming, ongoing pitting people against her, ongoing denying of things, never taking responsibility for personal gain, purposeful, all those things. Okay. Nicole from Massachusetts says, my husband has bipolar 2 disorder. He got the idea for us to get a dog. He asked me to locate shelters, research breeds, set up an appointment, and finally to submit paperwork to adopt the dog that we both wanted. Every step of the way, I was asking for reassurance that he really wanted to do this, and he confirmed that he did. Finally, the morning he was supposed to send the deposit for the dog, he flipped the script and told me he never said he wanted the dog, and I was ridiculous for thinking he could afford it. It was such an obvious gaslighting, but it didn't work. It was such obvious gaslighting that it didn't work. But it suddenly hit me how many times he had done this in the past, and it did work in the past to convince me that I was to blame. I do not really know if this is intentional behavior or just a result of polar opposite mindsets between his two mood swings given his bipolar 2. Berto, does this sound like gaslighting?
Not as much as some of the others. Again, I'm just going by your criteria. So I don't, in any of these answers, I assume that I am finding the behavior bad. I'm sorry you went through these things. It sounds super not cool that you had to put all this work together. You got it all prepped up, and then at the last minute, the rug was swept out from under your feet. That said, even though it's mentioned that this happened, or this kind of behavior has happened before, I get a sense more of, and whether it's there bipolar or not, I get more of a sense of lying for convenience or maybe for shame. In this case, I'm not so sure if it was for shame. It's like, I think that the person clearly did have some ambivalence about getting a dog. Maybe they're not good at expressing their ambivalence. Maybe they're okay enough to go along with it, but they're passive aggressive, and then they don't actually want to tell you what they really think. But when they're finally put to the sign on the dotted line, they have no choice but to be like, and then they revert to lying because they're like, I never wanted. I can't believe you thought I wanted it. So is it manipulative? I think so. But it just didn't quite fit the full criteria, in my opinion.
Yeah. If someone wants to say this is gaslighting, fine. It's not a technical clinical term, but in terms of the way I define it, it's possible, as Nicole, you say, maybe this is just a product of his mood swings. Because when you suffer from bipolar, it's not uncommon, given the two states of mind, as you put them, to have a completely different view of the world. Now, it's not normal, or it's not typical for someone to emerge from one of the poles to not remember things precisely, especially if it was recently, because it sounds like these things happened kind of recently. So maybe it was a shame lying mixed in with the bipolar there. I don't know. But there is one element that you talk about, Nicole, that could indicate, if we knew more data, that gaslighting is occurring, which is, it suddenly hit me how many times he had done this before in the past, and it did work to convince me that I was to blame. So maybe this is the first time you've realized in this one instance, wait, I'm being gaslit on an ongoing basis, and this time it just didn't work. Because in the past, because I'm guessing if it did work in the past, Nicole, I'm guessing that it wasn't just him denying it. It was, there was that psychological, manipulative, purposeful effort to get you to question your own judgment. So from the story, it's not classical gaslighting, but I suspect that if we knew more, there would be more that would actually indicate an ongoing effort of gaslighting by the partner. I'm not sure. Patron Natasha from California, she wrote in and said, personally, the military's approach to sexual assault is the closest thing to how you define gaslighting that I've experienced. My squadron was recently out on the carrier, and a female sailor was assaulted by a group of men in masks. You know, trigger a word. Yeah. So my squadron's response was to talk to the women only about keeping ourselves safe and walking in groups. And they gave us all flashlights. I asked around, and none of the men in my squadron even knew the assault happened because no one talked to them about it. The assault was confirmed as a real event later over the intercom one morning. The worst part, though, is the way male sailors speak of sexual assault as an imagined event, as if all women are conniving and manipulative. The only reason a woman would claim to be raped is so no one can call her a slut. Misogyny serves to keep women apart, to keep us to compare ourselves with one another, to not defend each other because we don't want to be a lame outcast, if you will, that can't hang with the guys. It's as if gaslighting is built into the system. I was much more vocal when I joined about all these kinds of injustice. Over the past 4 years, though, I've shrunken inside myself because of how alienating and lonely it is to be a woman with an opinion. I'm a bit ashamed of this, but I was tired of being excluded and associated with tension. I'm getting out next month, though, so hopefully the real world is more forgiving. So, Berto, gaslighting, what do you think?
Again, going by the definitions, in my opinion, the males in this story, like the peer males, are probably acting more from motivated reasoning. They just don't want to believe it. It's not convenient for their worldview. And now some of them might be lying out of shame or might be psychopaths. Who knows? But the point is that,
I mean, some of them were committing the crimes.
yeah, exactly. So they might just be like, no, what? I've never heard of this. Right. Now, you could claim the system maybe is doing, at the very least, propaganda, maybe even some amount of brainwashing or something. But I don't know. It just doesn't fit the criteria. Like, to me, no one's out to explicitly drive the people insane. And there's no... and again, I'm not in the situation. By the way, the situation is beyond horrible. Even just that little brief account, like I can't believe it. It's terrible.
Yeah,
it's
and
beyond terrible.
It happens all the time.
And it happens all the time. So
and it's studied.
It's unconscionable.
It's a statistical reality that sexual assaults are happening frequently in the military. Yeah. People of all genders, by the way, but particularly women.
Right. Just going by definitions, I don't know. It doesn't exactly fit, but we certainly need a horrific word. In fact, I'd say, like, I wouldn't call this gaslighting, if anything, because gaslighting doesn't sound bad enough.
This is awful. It's sexist. It's misogynistic. It's criminal. It's harm. Terrible injustice. The military is presumably a force for good, right? It's supposed to be there to protect our interests, which presumably have to do with human rights. It's supposed to be there to protect the innocent. And all the while, you have individuals in the military being harmed and then being, gaslit, if you will, by the system into believing that it's not a big deal or it's their fault. If they had been in groups, the way that Natasha says this, it's like, okay, ladies, it's your fault that this woman was attacked. Make sure that, let's see, she says, so my squadron's response was to talk to women only about keeping ourselves safe and walking in groups, and they gave us flashlights. So it's like, look, rapes are going to happen. It's just a part of reality. It's okay. It's normal. What's not normal is that you don't walk in groups and you don't have a flashlight with you. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So this is an awful situation, and it's been going on for decades. We've known about it for a long time, and it continues. I think there are obviously programs that are trying to reduce this, and I don't know the success rate, but clearly we still have a problem. And okay, so gaslighting checklist. It's, for me, when I hear this story from Natasha, I actually like to use the word gaslighting, and agree with you, Berto, that we almost need a bigger word for this. We need to invent some, because misogyny doesn't fit it. Rape culture doesn't seem to encapsulate everything. You could call it institutionalized rape culture or institutionalized rape apologizing or systematic misogynistic rape of women. There's some phrase that I think would encapsulate that. But gaslighting kind of fits as well, I think.
Yeah, to me, it's a bit akin, not the same, but a bit akin to the institutionalized brainwashing, gaslighting, or worse, about racism, and certain areas of this country and things like that, where it's like, what? There's no racism. It's literally like what you see. Don't trust your eyes. Don't trust your ears. That video clip, no, that's not that. Whatever you think, it's not real. It's not racism. It's not sexism. It's not this. That is mind control. That is lying to convince you that you're wrong in the face of all the evidence that you're seeing. So I suppose, certainly from the colloquial version of that I've come to know of gaslighting, yeah, that's like gaslighting 101. But it's almost like there is this thing. It's when it's institutionalized, it's so much worse.
Yeah, and the motivated reasoning, a part of this, or the motivation for the gaslighting, actually would be a better way to put it, is the same as for the Catholic Church. When victims came forward of sexual abuse by clergy, the power structure wanted one, to protect the parishioners. I mean, they weren't psychopaths, usually, the power structure. They cared about the victims, but they also cared about their institution. They cared about their jobs. They cared about the optics of the Catholic Church. They cared about retaining parishioners and thus money and power. If they lost parishioners, they lost money, they lost power. So they were in a bind in their own mind. On one hand, they want to protect. On the other hand, it's so much easier to deny the reality and to just move the clergyman to another location and sweep it under the rug, because at least for tomorrow, it retains your power, it retains your livelihood, it retains your belief system. And hundreds or thousands of powered individuals made that decision either collectively or independently. And then what you have is an institution as a whole that is, in a sense, systematically raping children and denying it and covering it up and excusing it away. So as a system, that's how it works. Individuals within that system, because of the way the system operates, because of the policies and procedures that they have, that they use, and the culture of the system, the institution ends up gaslighting its parishioners, making the victims in society believe that they're the crazy ones, when it's not necessarily this evil genius at the top of the pyramid going, ha, 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 I'm setting out to gaslight the people. It's the culture, it's the system, it's these individual little decisions. Again, I don't know, we can't be inside the minds of the power structure, but a parishioner comes to you and says, this clergy person raped me. And let's say that the power person believes the story. Well, that power person is thinking, okay, what do I do? On one hand, that clergy person needs to be punished. On the other hand, if I punish him, it's going to get public, and a lot of people are going to get upset, and there's going to be press, and there's going to be news stories, and there's going to be movies, and I'm going to get dragged into it, and the parishioners are going to get dragged into it. No one wants that. What's the easiest way to do this? I'll pray with the parishioner and say, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I'll take care of it. And then I'll slowly and quietly suspend the clergy and send him to another state, and everyone wins. That's the individual's decision-making tree that they make. Of course, it's immoral and wrong. We see that from the outside, but when you're on the inside and all the different factors, that's how a non-psychopath can make a psychopathic decision. And then you compound that 1,000 times and you have a psychopathic gaslighting institution. Am I making my case, Berto?
You are. I'm just going to call it plutonium lighting. It's like, they put up all these they put up all these street lights in your neighborhood, maybe in your whole city, and you start complaining that you're developing all sorts of illnesses, your skin is peeling away, you're getting really sick. And it's like, no. And then you're like, I think it's the lights. It's like, no, it's not. You're just making things up. You always had that rash.
Is this a true story?
No, I'm just saying, like, it turns out they put plutonium rods in there. So the institutionalized version of gaslighting.
I could just see that happening in the 50s in some Texas town. It's like, yay, plutonium.
Right. Yeah, so the institutionalized version is plutonium lighting. But I was going to also say that you could imagine a more specific case of gaslighting, where imagine, in this case, the priest example, where you abused me, and it's like, no, actually, you have demons, and I need to work with you to exorcise those demons. And then like going down a whole path of making the person believe they're actually possessed and all that sort of thing.
Right. So just getting back to the clergy, there were individual cases where that was happening, where someone came forward and the clergy or others would get the victim to believe that they're crazy. This was well depicted in the TV series Unbelievable that came out a couple years ago.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, I thought you did. I thought we watched it together. It was Netflix.
Unbelievable.
We talked.
Oh, wait.
We talked with Christy.
Yeah. Sorry,
about it.
That's the one about the here in Washington State.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Linwood. Yeah.
I thought it was some show about priests or something.
No. About it was about the rape victim that came forward, and then the police convinced or tried to convince.
I thought you were
her.
gaslighting me about a show.
Yeah. So to go to the military, you have a system that has a massive culture of sexism and misogyny, literal hate of women.
Yeah.
There's plenty of people in the military openly who will say, women shouldn't be here. I don't want them here. Get rid of them. They're weak. They're stupid. They don't know what they're doing. They're too emotional. Whatever the idea is get rid of them. And you have a system that makes subordinates lack power and advocacy for themselves. Shut up, stay in your place, be a team player, these kinds of things. And then you have a culture and a policy maybe around, sexual assaults. Yeah, the enlisted class they'll do stuff to each other sometimes. And we just all understand that they just have to put up with it, this kind of attitude. And then a literal attitude around, well, if someone claims to be raped, it's probably them just trying to avoid being called a slut. We all understand that, these just terrible misogynistic ideas. And as Natasha was saying, and you add all that up and you have tiny gaslighting moments and an institution that gaslights the women. The women are walking around going like, wait, am I crazy for feeling like there's something wrong with this policy of a woman was raped by a gang of masked sailors? Jeez. And us women are being pulled into a room to be told that we need to stick in groups and wear flashlights. Like, wait, what's going on here? Without that confirmation from the outside. And then Natasha also says that there's this culture that pits women against each other so that they're isolated. They can't form a union, if you will. So to me, it's not classic gaslighting in the sense of an abusive relationship, but I'm willing to use it in that situation, right? To me, in the same way that I'll say that there's propaganda that tells me as a man I can't have my feelings, that, it's not strict use of the term propaganda. I think gaslighting fits in this situation, even though it's not classic in terms of the...
I'll take it.
Yeah. All right. Michelle from Yorkshire says, my experience with gaslighting was with the medical profession. Oh, actually, I decided to read this one, Berto, because I thought you might be able to relate to it. Okay. It'll become very clear why.
I see.
I attended the doctor as I was struggling with an overwhelming fatigue and weight gain. I could not function at all. I'd hit a brick wall. I was informed that I was clearly depressed again, and I needed to work on coping strategies and get a grip on my diet. And I was sent away with antidepressants. Thankfully, my husband advocated for me, arranged another consultation, and demanded a full physical. I was contacted the next day with news I had severely underactive thyroid. So, Berto,
God.
Can you relate? And two, is this gaslighting?
Oh, my God.
Because you went through this.
I literally did. I can so relate. It's so just my little soapbox. Because I've been through it now. Now I know. I had no idea, just like everyone else. The thyroid is the most important thing that happens in your body. I mean, it's like there's other important things, but the thyroid controls some very key things, including your heart, including your breathing, your lungs, your everything. So like the thyroid produces very important hormones. Okay. Now, at the same time, it seems to be the least understood thing when you go for an emergency. I went through this where a little over a year ago, I was feeling worse than I had ever felt. And I went to the ER and they checked me out and they just concluded it was probably anxiety. And I believed it, so, because then it happened again like that the next week. And I went to another ER and they looked at the notes. They talked to me like, yeah, you're just having a panic attack. So they prescribed me some anxiety pills. And I was like, oh, okay, all right. That must be it. I need to learn to relax. Now, time went on, and then in the fall, I had it worse than before. And this time, luckily, it was bad enough to where they couldn't just blame it on some anxiety, and they had to run more tests, and they discovered that I too had thyroid issues. And then all of a sudden I looked back and I'm like, oh my gosh, I wonder how many times over the last few years I've been thinking I'm just having some weird funny feelings or anxiety, and I was actually having, actual hormonal imbalances from my thyroid. All right. So were they gaslighting me? I don't think so. No, they weren't. They didn't mean ill. Like, I remember the guy in the ER, the second ER a year ago. He was so kind and spent so much time to me, and he explained that he suffered from anxiety, and he told me how bad it can feel, and I believed it. And look, I've actually had anxiety before, and I thought, yeah, of course he wasn't trying to gaslight me or control me or make me question my own sanity. No, it was the opposite.
Yeah.
It's just that, unfortunately, there are these symptoms that I wish people were more informed about. People, I mean, in the medical profession, where they're like, well, just for shits and giggles,
Yeah.
let's run the following tests.
Yeah. I would call this either medical incompetence. I would also call this motivated reasoning, because as a clinician, you really emotionally want to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And you might be under a lot of pressure to get to the next patient, and it's so much more convenient to say, this is an anxiety problem, this is your depression, because you write a script for antidepressant, send them home, and you can move on to the next patient because you're being pressured by your superiors to have a high productivity. I'm quite positive 95% of physicians would love to run all the tests with every single patient they have, but they can't. That's just not economically
And the insurance
feasible.
won't pay for it.
Right. So each individual is probably doing their best. They're probably, some of them might be incompetent. Some of them might not understand the thyroid. Some of them might be operating from motivated reasoning that they might later realize, oh, I was probably not looking at it with an open mind.
Yeah.
But you have a system, if we, again, want to, similar to Natasha's example, want to say that you have a system that is gaslighting patients, in that you have a system in the medical field, according to you and maybe to Michelle, that is, for whatever reason, just ignoring the thyroid as an option.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because it's rare. I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of people who have diagnosable thyroid problems, so it can't be that rare,
Right.
And so what is it about the system? Is everyone operating on good faith, but the system is oriented towards, I don't know, cheaper treatment? Because if the thyroid is implicated, now you're talking about much more expensive things, more involved,
Right.
maybe. So is that what the system is oriented? Maybe there's a policy or a culture that is actually gaslighting patients into thinking, like we could look back at you, Berto, before you were diagnosed, when you were going, and don't let me put words in your mouth, but correct me if I'm wrong, you're like, I kind of know what anxiety feels like. This doesn't feel like anxiety.
Oh, totally. That's exactly how I felt.
But they keep telling me that this is anxiety and everything's fine. So it must be anxiety. My ability to gauge my own body and my own anxiety, I must be wrong.
I must be wrong.
I must not be able to evaluate that. I must have a bad evaluator of my own body and my own anxiety, because they told me that I'm fine, so it must be anxiety. I am now questioning my ability to understand a fact from fiction.
Yeah.
And you started to question yourself, right?
Actually, so this reminds me. So later on, so in the fall, after I had been diagnosed, so they put me on a medicine. The medicine controls how much thyroid is produced, how much hormone is produced. But a couple weeks in, I started feeling horrible. And so I ended up going back to the ER a couple times because I felt horrible. And again, they were like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it sounds like they said you said they diagnosed you with the thyroid thing. And that's probably that. Go home. And it's like, okay, fine. And so it was like, even though we knew this, I was still not getting help. And then I remember at one point, even I was talking to someone I know, and even they were like, well, are you sure it's not just like maybe you kind of being anxious about the fact that and I'm like, no. And turns out that the medicine, as they had prescribed it to me, the dosage was too high and it had dipped me too low. And now I was having hypothyroidism. And until someone finally listened to me at one of the ER visits, they were like, okay. And then they ran a test and they're like, oh yeah, I think you're too low. Finally. And I was like, thank goodness. So then they adjusted the dosage, but it was so frustrating. I'm like, why isn't anyone understanding that? I get what you're saying, and I've felt that this is not that.
Right. So is any one of those individuals, according to your estimation, maliciously trying to make you question your reality?
No.
Yeah. But the system was making you question your reality.
Yes.
The way that because your experience probably isn't unique. Especially given what Michelle is saying, it's like an exact thing, right? Or a very similar thing. In my, as I start to hear these stories and sort of think about it, I think that there are situations where it doesn't strictly meet the old criteria of gaslighting, but we could sort of expand it in the same way that we might expand the word propaganda, like I would say. Anyway, okay. So let's talk about a couple more here, Berto. Actually, we don't have time, so let's skip down to this one. Well, no, let's see. Yeah, this one. A few years ago, my husband, now ex, and I were expecting a child. And he smokes weed often, and I asked him to smoke outside instead of in our apartment, which he agreed to. I thought it might be better for the baby. I also had morning sickness that was very affected by any scent. One day I stepped into his office and I saw a huge plume of smoke coming out of his mouth. It was obvious that he had been smoking inside, against our agreement. Yet he insisted for several days that he hadn't been smoking. He was so insistent that I began to doubt myself. I had to remind myself of what I actually witnessed. Otherwise, the facts started to feel twisted to me. Berto, is this gaslighting?
Oh my gosh, that facts started to feel twisted to me. That one is, facts started to feel twisted to me. Sounds scary. That's when you're like, what?
Yeah. In that instance, you would say, well, it's gaslighting-esque at the very least.
Yeah, right.
But is he on a mission to make you question your judgment in general, or is it just about this issue? And is he shame lying? He's probably shame lying.
Yeah. No, that's probably right.
He's terribly ashamed of either his behavior or his addiction, by the way.
It's just the reason I'm thinking that there is a little bit there, but so you asked me to think of examples maybe that had happened to me or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was thinking back to money issues with my dad when I was young, where he would just lie to my face about where something had gone or whatever, and because he had sold it. It's funny.
Just an asterisk on this. You told the same story 4 years ago in the episode we did.
In the same. Oh my gosh, yeah. Okay,
but it's good. It's perfect. Say it again.
But that's the thing, is that I actually think that was, now that you've given me these other definitions, that was shame lying, that he didn't want or just flat out manipulative to I don't know what the other word would be, but manipulation. Just like. It wasn't actually, he wasn't trying to drive me insane, and he wasn't trying to anyways, I think that it was more localized than that. It was, I can't really tell you why I need this money. I can't really tell you what happened to your toy. So I'm just going to pretend I don't know what happened to the toy. Yeah, that's weird that it's not in your closet. And in fact, he sold it because he needed the money.
Right. The sequence, in case people are not knowing, is you wouldn't be able to find your toy, and you'd go to him and you're like, where's my toy? And he'd be like, I don't know where it is.
It wasn't just any toy. Yeah. It was the X-Wing fighter and the TIE fighter. Star Wars, original 70s toys.
Yeah, something that you would definitely know if you and you would definitely know if you somehow threw it away or something, yeah.
And my closet was like a small closet, like it wasn't hiding in some massive storage facility.
So he would say, I don't know where it is, even though he absolutely did know where it was because he sold it. Yeah. And he would say, I don't know, you lose things sometimes, maybe it, who knows? And,
who knows?
And
that's weird.
Yeah. So does that have a gaslighting effect? Yeah. But is it gaslighting? I don't know. If people want to use it in that sense, fine. But to me, I would call that more addictive shame lying, which is really common for people who suffer from addictions. They're terribly ashamed and in denial of a lot of things. And they're also terribly dependent on the substance or the behavior. And they will do anything to retain that relationship with the substance, and including lying, because to admit, yes, son, I took your stuff and sold it, then it's well known, at least to one person, that they have a big problem and that they've got to change. If they, at least in this tiny little moment, just sort of shoo away the child, say anything to get the child to move away, they survived that one moment retaining their connection to the substance. They don't have to question things. They don't have to answer any more questions. So is that gaslighting? Yeah, I mean, it has a gaslighting effect, but I don't think it comes from that abusive place like that story we told earlier, where someone goes on this campaign of trying to convince you that you're to blame for everything. You're too young. You don't understand things. I'm the smart one. Listen to me. Obey me.
The flip side example is a friend of mine had this ex who absolutely was gaslighting him. Absolutely. Where she would make up completely fabricated stories against his friends, including me, had him convinced that because of her connections, she could ruin him in Seattle, in the scene that he was in. Just ruin him. So he was afraid. I remember because at one point he was trying to do something, set up for some project he was doing. And I was like, oh, hey, why don't you do this? It's like, well, I'd like to, but I can't because she doesn't want me to. I'm like, well, but it's your project. No, you don't understand. She can ruin me if I don't do what she wants. Like he literally used those words. And at one point she convinced him that I had kicked her out, told her she was never welcome again in my house or whatever. So him and I didn't speak for like 6 months because he was so upset at me, and I had no idea why he was upset. And then come to find out, and I was like, what are you talking about? It was absolute gaslighting. Absolute.
Yeah. So from our episode 4 years ago, at the end of the episode, I had this guide to how to protect yourself. So here are the summary. We'll end with this. 1, if you think you're being gaslit, do not isolate yourself. Don't let yourself to be isolated. This is key, because under certain conditions, all of us can be gaslit. All of us can be effectively gaslit. Stay in connection. Tell other people, a therapist, a friend, a family member, someone you trust, that you can say, so this thing happened the other day and my partner is totally convinced I'm to blame for it. I'm not really quite sure. Your friend will hopefully give you a straight answer that will help. You need that. Also, just get emotional support. Also, you might want to shed light on the matter. Don't allow the story to just stay between the two of you. That's the abuser's tactic, is never air our dirty laundry. If that is a way of keeping you under their thumb, that's a way of keeping the narrative under their control. And they know that. And so if you shed light on it, if you're just like, you just type up the story and like hand it out to 5 of your friends, that's the kryptonite to the abuser. Because when light is shown on the abusive behavior, the abuser knows that it will not stand up to scrutiny. And they know the only way it could stand up to scrutiny is if they isolate the victim and convince the victim that everything is normal, like some of the stories we heard before. Also, stay in control of your own mind as best as you can. Keep reminding yourself that you're smart, you know things, you're not 100% irrational. You might be 3% irrational, but you've got 97% rational mind. You understand things. The other thing is get away from the gaslighter. If you know what's happening, get away from the abusive person. Get with your other people because that might be the only solution. Know that you deserve better than that. You deserve a relationship where someone respects you and listens to you and admits that they're wrong. This is a good litmus test. Everyone deserves to be in a relationship, whether it's friend, family, spouse, workmate, where other people admit they did something wrong and apologize to you. Maybe they don't say, oh my God, I'm a terrible person, but they say, oh yeah, I made that mistake. You're right. Now let me...
That's a good one.
Like if you're with people that never say that, know that you are not getting what you deserve. You deserve people where you, even little things, just like, hey, that little thing, you deserve someone to be like, you know what? You're right. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to, but I could see how that would hurt you. And I'm sorry I did that. Everyone deserves that. And so many people do not have that for a lot of reasons. Also, fight back if you feel safe enough to do so in all the various ways by saying, no, you're wrong. I'm right. I know I'm right because I saw the pests in my house. I know this isn't just depression. I know that rape is not normal and that rape is not women's fault. I know that just because I'm young, that doesn't mean I know nothing. I know these things. Final word, Berto.
Yeah, I think that the main one that I think I would latch onto is reach out to others and find a community, or if you don't already have one. I was thinking as you were saying those, there are a lot of tools these days to express yourself. Make little Twitch videos or Instagram clips, or make a YouTube video, or start your own podcast. And but even if you don't want to go to those extents, finding communities could be useful. Like I found a community about thyroid disease on Facebook. And I don't participate a ton, but I see and I comment here and there, and it's actually really helpful because guess what? I see stories from other people and I'm like, yes, thank you. That's what happened to me. Or someone will say like, does anyone notice this symptom? And other people will be like, yes, I get that too. And all of a sudden I feel like, validated, right? And even to the point that there are a lot of these stories where people go, have you been to the doctor and they told you it was just anxiety? I'm like, yes, thank you. So, I think finding a community can help, compare and contrast data, and that can be helpful in this.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you found that.
Yeah.
I know that you'd been struggling with your health this last year and kept trying. We're dutifully going to the doctor, the hospital, doing your job, and you were let down by the community, by the medical community, over something that is at least common enough. If you said, the gobbledygook gland, blah, 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 it's like, I've known about hyper and hypothyroidism for just sort of, people talk about it. It's something that you hear about for 20 years. I mean, like to the point where I think maybe 5 years ago or something, I was like, I'm feeling this. And my wife was like, maybe you have something wrong with your thyroid. It's just one of those things that it's at least well known enough. It's not like 0.0001% of the people. We're talking about common enough that why can't the system at least ask that question and say
it's not like I'm like, well, I have a third brain in my nipple.
All right. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining us out there, and please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.